Turning our focus to federal politics, the Liberal government has introduced legislation aimed at tightening the border. It follows the government's promise in the throne speech to bolster security and provide enforcement agencies with new tools to help stop the flow of fentanyl. The CBC's Marina von Stackelberg is on the story for us. She's live in Ottawa. So, Marina, what can you tell us about this new proposed legislation?
Well, if we think back a while ago, a lot of this discussion about border legislation came with the threat of the U.S. tariffs on the premise that Canada's border was an issue with illegal drugs and people crossing through. And so Canada had proposed this $1.3 billion border plan that includes giving new powers and authorities to border security. But in order to bring through that plan, there needs to be legislation. And so that is what we're learning about today. Bill C2, basically three main focuses. Like I mentioned there, more law enforcement powers to deal with what the federal government says is illegal migration, transnational organized crime, fentanyl, money laundering, and terrorist financing. Also, to create a safe and sovereign and secure Canada, and that includes the changing economic and security relationship with the United States. And finally, to modernize our laws to deal with new security threats as they develop. And so I want to break down some of the ways in which the federal government plans to alter and change existing legislation to bring about these changes. So first of all, force transporters and warehouses to give Canadian border officers access to the premises. So in situations where they want to investigate suspicious sort of movement, they'll have the ability to do that. Coast Guard. Give the Coast Guard the ability to conduct security patrols and basically bring that information to law enforcement officials if needed. In terms of sex offenders, making it easier for law enforcement to share that registry information with partners. The federal government also wants to give more powers to the health minister and law enforcement to stop the flow of chemicals that could be used to make illicit drugs. They also want to make it easier for Canada Post and for law enforcement to search suspicious mail. And finally, dealing with that money laundering and terrorist financing, they want to step up enforcement and also bring in new restrictions on large cash transactions. So a whole suite of measures the federal government is hoping to bring in to kind of beef up security here for the country. So Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangaree, making that announcement earlier today in the House of Commons, was asked, about these sweeping powers that the federal government wants to give law enforcement agencies. If he's concerned at all about, Canadian civil liberties, human rights, he pointed to the fact that he has a background in law and human rights and how he feels confident with this proposed legislation. Have a listen.
In order for me to bring forward legislation, it needed to have the safeguards in place. It needed to be charter in line with the values of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I fundamentally believe that we have strike the balance that while expanding powers in certain instances does have the safeguards and the protections in place to protect individual freedoms and rights.
The minister was also asked, questions about sharing this information with law enforcement partners, including the United States. Can the Americans be trusted with our information based on what we've seen kind of transpire in the U.S. over the last few months? Also questions about, what the safety for Canadians will be. So he was fielding questions about that. We do know that Canada does plan to share this plan with the U.S. border czar, Tom Homan, later today. But this is also an issue that has been raised domestically in Canada as well, this idea about border issues, about crime. We heard the premiers talk about this. Municipalities have been raising concerns in terms of the issue of stolen vehicles and the issues of bail reform. And so this is something that has been asked for here domestically and something that the federal government says is not just in reaction to the U.S., but because of concerns here in Canada as well. The question will be, passing through this legislation, the Conservatives have said that they would support measures to strengthen the border, but we will have to see how this actually pans out here in Ottawa.
And meanwhile, more tariffs could be coming as of midnight. What do we know about Canada's plans to try and head these off?
Yeah, so the latest Trump threat of a doubling of the tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports into the United States, that would include Canada. Right now it's 25%. It could go up to 50%. Ottawa has been trying to negotiate these tariffs off. We know that Dominic LeBlanc, the minister responsible for dealing with this relationship, is down in Washington right now. Talking to Power and Politics last night, he said that, an extra tariff like this would mean that American businesses would not be able to afford basic elements in manufacturing. He says ultimately he thinks that Trump will change his mind because of the hit to the American economy and those retaliatory tariffs that Canada has put on that are hurting Americans and Canadians as well, really. And he says that Ottawa is hopeful that these will be restricted. But there is pressure here from the Canadian steel and aluminum industry as well on the federal government. This is not just a hit for the United States. The steel and aluminum, or rather, it's not just a hit with the United States tariffs, but the fact that steel and aluminum from other countries might come into Canada getting dumped here because essentially in the United States of these tariffs. Have a listen to the finance minister responding to questions about that.
These are global tariffs, as you know, so we're talking to our friends also in the European Union, but what I want to say is that we've been clear from the get-go that we would fight these tariffs, we would protect our worker and industry and build a country. In the building the country and protecting our worker and industry, using Canadian steels is the key. We need to use more Canadian steel, we need to have measures in place to favor that, and that's exactly the discussion I'm having with the industry.
Discussion also likely with the provinces and territories. We know that the premiers were meeting yesterday in Saskatoon. They were basically pitching their projects for infrastructure, for energy that they want to see the federal government either to approve or support financially. And the discussion about how these projects might be built, whether or not they'll be using aluminum and steel from Canada, I'm sure that will also be playing out as well.
Marina, thank you. Marina von Stackelberg live in Ottawa.